let's start our recording with Phred. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. Today I want to take you on a whirlwind tour of some of the events I have captured with a high-speed camera. This is intended to be more about entertainment than technical information, so let's just have a bit of fun. And yes, these events actually last less than a second, so you'd think it would be a very short talk. But I captured everything at very high frame rates, and at normal playback, we're going to be here a while. Think of it as a digital lava lamp. Just sit back and enjoy. The things I am showing today are mostly the results of personal experiments, though these often run in parallel with my research collaborations. Some may seem a bit silly. This is probably because, while I may have an expensive curiosity, I have never had much of a research budget, so my favorite scientific suppliers have been the dollar store and Toys R Us. I have done a lot of Schlieren and shadowgraph photography because I am interested in gas flows, and these techniques use the refractive index gradients found in many events as an inbuilt optical marker for flow visualization. But let's set aside the technical discussion and get down to looking at results. Here we can see the plume of heat and combustion gases from the ignition of an ordinary propane torch. At its simplest, Schlieren photography produces monochrome images, creating a shadow highlight effect to visualize flow phenomena. This video was made using a large field retroreflective grid Schlieren system that was constructed by one of my students. But with a few modifications, we can optically introduce color into the image. Everything you see here was captured by the camera. I don't use post-production methods to color the images in any of my work. Cyan, magenta, and yellow filters at the light source created the color palette that you see here. Schlieren and shadowgraph methods are excellent for capturing shock waves in air, as the compression front creates a density gradient with a corresponding change in refractive index. Here you are seeing the sound of a balloon pop. The large circle is the sound wave. The exposure time here was 300 nanoseconds. Shockwave reflections are also fascinating. With a bit of sewer pipe, a garden sprayer, and some water balloons, I was able to construct a workable apparatus to visualize shocks moving at just over Mach 1. The patterns of the shockwave reflections from the concave surface are quite complex and, in my opinion, naturally beautiful. Here is a composite of 6 frames taken from the video, which make it a bit easier to see several different phases of the shock reflection. Another kind of shock phenomenon is the standing shock wave, often seen in the blast from a jet engine. This is not my photograph, by the way. Notice the diamond-like structure in the jet blast called Mach disks or shock diamonds. Unfortunately, fighter jets are expensive, and as you might expect, they need a really big studio to turn them on. I can afford neither. But I can afford one of these, a toy rocket launcher used to make water-powered rockets out of PET soda bottles. The instructions state, never use without water in the bottle. So what's the first thing a geek like me is gonna do? You got it. We pressurized the bottle with CO2 and pulled the launch cord. And this is what we saw. Beautiful shock diamonds in the flow exiting the bottle. These were visualized with a 3-colored direction-indicating Schlieren system. Much cheaper and less dangerous than using an F-16, I must say. For low-speed wind tunnel experiments, where strong refractive gradients are not present, seeding the flow with smoke is a common approach. Although simple in theory, in practice, generating smooth smoke flow seems to be a dynamic balance of science and the black arts. This is a design for an aircraft fuel pod that reduces the drag caused by turbulent flow at the trailing end. The smoke streamers were created with an oil-covered, heated wire. Our engineering students used this as part of an entry into an international aviation design competition. This is taken from an engineering student project to study the performance of different shuttlecock designs. In both of these cases, the objects under study were firmly fixed in the flow field. Wind tunnels are good for studying continuous flow. But what about looking at an object that starts or stops in quiescent air? My no-budget approach to looking at the air surrounding the liftoff of a small quadcopter was to simply use a linear array of incense sticks on each side of the aircraft. Unfortunately, the aroma of the lab after several flights took me back to my college days in the early 70s. Even simple research has its risks. We've all seen these seeds and probably played with them as a child. Autorotating maple seeds have been studied in vertical wind tunnels by constraining them on a wire through their axis of rotation and balancing the airflow. But how could we see what happens with a freely falling seed? Using an old two-part Hollywood smoke formula and a glass tank, I was able to design a static air chamber that allowed for smoke generation originating at the surface of a falling maple seed. Notice the leading edge vortices as it swirls downward. Seeing this, one of my colleagues and I got an idea. We used this smoke technique to model how a person's movement might impact environmental air quality in the workplace. The investigator was specifically interested in what happens when someone walks up and stops at a workstation. Notice how the turbulent plume trailing behind the moving figure wraps around to the front when it stops. I reckon the most practical finding for everyday life is this: you can't outrun last night's bean burrito. You can laugh all you want, but the scientific evidence is right there in front of you. It's true. I worked pretty regularly with the micro air vehicles group in RMIT Mechanical Engineering. I'm sure this nurtured my interest in playing with model aircraft. From my own experience, MAVs had a couple of advantages. You can fly them indoors, and as you will see, they are small enough to fit in the field of view of my Schlieren mirrors, which are 300 millimeters in diameter. One of the things they were investigating was how flapping wing insects maintain stable flight in turbulent air. So it was into the wind tunnel with a locust on a sting. Don't fret, we had a catch and release program. But given that we were in a locust plague at the time, I'm not too bothered that one or two of them may have had their day interrupted to serve science. I thought it would be interesting to see the rotor downdraft from a small model helicopter using a Schlieren system. So I placed one on a surface covered with a film of ethanol to provide the requisite refractive index gradient and went to liftoff. This was captured with a traditional two-mirror Schlieren system using 300mm f10 mirrors. Here is a still image of the rotor wash made with a three-color Schlieren system. Even smaller is this quadcopter, where the aim was to see how the rotors drew in the surrounding air. The plumes you see are from two butane microtorches, and the Schlieren system was configured with a 3-color source filter and annular cutoff. The color is purely subjective based on the filter array used at the light source. Ordinary things can be quite lovely when you slow them down. Soap bubbles fit into my easy-to-access approach to scientific inquiry. When one experimental subject breaks, it is easy to make another, and another, and another. If you've never seen it before, it can be surprising to watch how a bubble bursts. It does not collapse, but rather unwraps around its original volume, as seen here. I never knew that until I filmed it. Soap films can be quite elastic and robust. Here we see a bubble ruptured by an air vortex entering from left of screen. I've already admitted to an interest in MAVs, and I thought the elasticity of a soap film might provide a way to visually map the three-dimensional airspace above an ascending quadcopter. After many wet and soapy attempts, we got this. And then we come to the humble water drop. We've all seen a million of them, but we will never see all of them. I still find such a simple event quite enchanting, and every one is unique. If you use liquids with differing surface tensions, the classic Edgerton milk crown takes on an entirely different look. Exposure time here is a relatively long 125 microseconds. Photographs of droplet collisions are all over the internet, but I still think they are fun, especially when you see them in motion. The microscopists in the crowd will no doubt recognize the lighting approach here as being very similar to Reinberg illumination. But what about what happens beneath the water surface? Here we see a glycerol water mixture being dropped into an aqueous solution of magnesium sulfate. Salt was added simply to reduce the difference in specific gravity between the glycerol solution and the water, hopefully slowing down the descent of the drop just a little bit. The viscous folding of the glycerol droplets is beautiful and I think almost poetic. I have an obvious fascination with fluid flows, but lots of other everyday things provoke my curiosity as well. Almost everyone is familiar with the trick of rubbing a wet finger around the rim of a wine glass to make it sing. Here we can actually see the vibration of the glass, and if I remember the frame rate of the camera, we could work out the pitch you would hear from the video alone. But to me, it is just as interesting what happens to the liquid inside as it begins to slosh and atomize from the vibration of the glass. Here's a little closer view of the droplet formation at the liquid surface inside the glass. Anybody remember these? I inherited a box full of flashbulbs and thought it would be nice to actually see the ignition process. My goal was to keep some tonal detail in the burn itself, and these things are bright. With a focused backlight to outline the bulb and crossed polarizers at the camera to act as a variable neutral density filter to manage the brightness of the burn, I think we got there. If you place two bulbs in contact, heat from one will ignite the other. This was a trick that allowed press photographers in years gone by to get a little bit of extra grunt out of their flash cone. Like I said, I inherited a large box of flashbulbs and was having lots of fun, so I glued a string of small ones together with superglue and triggered the one in the middle. I'm sure the neighbors wondered what was going on in my shed that day. It's fair to ask the question, what does a high-speed camera actually do best? Qualitative assessment of an event? Quantitative time and distance measurements? Well, it can be used for both. But a high-speed camera does one thing better than it does anything else. It encourages you to misbehave. You need look no further than the slow-mo guys on YouTube to know this is true. This leads me to close with what I will unashamedly call hedonistic high-speed video, a phrase that probably describes most of my work. Remember that you heard this term here first. What happens if you throw a fresh marshmallow at something? Nobody cares. But what happens if you throw it at 450 kilometers an hour? Well, let's do the experiment. The marshmallow will enter from the left. And look, the marshmallow escapes in one piece. Thank you. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope you found something of value in this talk. I encourage you, as photographers, to think about how the specialized tools and knowledge you have can help you look at the world around you in a different way. We really do live in a fascinating place.